Grace Harrington clutched the letter so tightly that her fingernails left half-moon impressions in the parchment as the stagecoach rattled westward across the Nebraska Territory in the spring of 1867. We regret to inform you that due to your father's untimely passing and the substantial debts he has left behind, arrangements have been made for you to reside with the Thornton family in Willow Creek. The words blurred as tears threatened again, but she had promised herself she wouldn't cry anymore. At 20 years old, she was being shipped off like unwanted cargo to live with people she'd never met. The stagecoach hit a rut in the road, jolting Grace from her thoughts. The elderly woman sitting across from her gave a sympathetic smile, but Grace turned her gaze to the window. The rolling plains stretched endlessly, so different from the crowded streets of Boston she had known all her life. Her father, once a respected merchant, had gambled away their fortune and then departed this world via a heart attack, leaving Grace with nothing but debts and a distant cousin who had arranged this arrangement. 3 days later, as the stagecoach pulled into Willow Creek, Grace felt her stomach twist into knots. The town was small, just a main street with a few businesses on either side. Men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats lingered outside the saloon, and women in practical dresses hurried about their errands. Willow Creek, the driver called out, pulling the horses to a stop in front of what appeared to be a general store. Grace gathered her 2 small valises, all she had left of her possessions, and stepped down into the dusty street. She had been told someone would meet her, but no one seemed to be waiting. "Miss Harrington," a stern voice called out. Grace turned to see a woman approaching, perhaps 50 years of age, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her dress was plain and practical, her expression equally unadorned with warmth. "Yes, I'm Grace Harrington," she replied, attempting a smile. "Margaret Thornton. My husband and I will be providing you with accommodations." The woman's eyes traveled over Grace's travel-worn appearance, lingering disapprovingly on her fashionable, if dusty, Boston attire. "I trust you had a tolerable journey." "It was long," Grace answered, not knowing what else to say. "Indeed, we live outside of town. The wagon is this way." Without offering to help with the bags, Mrs. Thornton turned and began walking toward a wagon parked at the end of the street. Grace hurried after her, struggling with her valises. "Here, let me help you with those, miss." The deep voice startled her. A tall man stepped forward from where he'd been leaning against the hitching post. He wore the typical garb of a cowboy: denim pants, a faded shirt, boots with spurs, and a hat that shaded his features. But when he reached for her bags, he looked directly at her face, and Grace felt a jolt of something unexpected. His eyes were a startling blue, like the summer sky, and they met hers with a directness that made her catch her breath. Most men in Boston had looked at her as an ornament or an opportunity, but this man seemed to actually see her. "Thank you," she managed to say as he took both valises effortlessly. "Quinn MacAllister," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "I work for the Thorntons, Grace Harrington." "I know." A hint of a smile touched his lips, and then he turned to follow Mrs. Thornton to the wagon. The ride to the Thornton ranch was uncomfortable in more ways than one. The wagon bumped and jolted over the uneven trail, and Mrs. Thornton maintained an icy silence broken only by occasional comments about what would be expected of Grace during her stay. "You'll help with the housework, of course," she said, "and the cooking and mending. I trust you have some skills in those areas." "Yes, some," Grace replied, though in truth her upbringing had been comfortable enough that she had only basic knowledge of such things. Quinn, who was driving the wagon, said nothing, but Grace caught him glancing at her in the wagon's mirror once or twice, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. The Thornton ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a sprawling, functional structure with a barn and several outbuildings. A few cowboys were visible in the distance, working with cattle. "It's not what you're used to, I expect," Mrs. Thornton remarked, "but it's honest living." "It looks lovely," Grace said diplomatically, though in truth the stark landscape and utilitarian buildings held little charm compared to the tree-lined streets of her home. Mr. Thornton proved to be as stern as his wife, a tall, gaunt man with a perpetual frown who barely acknowledged Grace's arrival before returning to his account books. The couple's two daughters, Louisa and Ruth, both in their late teens, regarded Grace with undisguised curiosity and a hint of suspicion. "You'll sleep in the small room off the kitchen," Mrs. Thornton informed her. "Breakfast is at 5 sharp. We expect everyone to carry their weight here." Grace nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in her throat. What had she done to deserve such a cold reception? The Thorntons were her father's second cousins, family in name if not in feeling. Quinn carried her bags to the small room, which contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a peg on the wall for her clothes. "It ain't much," he said quietly, "but it stays warm in winter and cool in summer." "Thank you," Grace replied, standing awkwardly in the doorway, "for your help." He set the bags down and turned to face her. Again, those blue eyes met hers directly. "Folks around here take time to warm up to newcomers," he said. "Don't take it personal." With that, he touched the brim of his hat and left her alone with her thoughts and the crushing weight of her new reality. The next morning arrived too early, with Mrs. Thornton rapping sharply on her door before the sun had fully risen. Grace dressed quickly in her plainest dress and hurried to the kitchen, where she found the family already gathered around the table. "Grace will say grace," Mr. Thornton announced with what he clearly thought was clever wordplay, given the thin smile that briefly crossed his face. Grace, caught off guard, stammered through a blessing for the food. When she opened her eyes, she found Quinn watching her from across the table, the only person who seemed to see her discomfort. The days that followed settled into a grueling routine. Grace woke before dawn to help prepare breakfast, spent the morning cleaning and washing, the afternoon mending and helping Mrs. Thornton preserve food, and the evening clearing up after dinner. Her hands, once soft and unmarked, became chapped and calloused. Her fashionable dresses hung unused in the small wardrobe, replaced by the practical work dresses Mrs. Thornton provided. The Thornton daughters, after determining that Grace posed no threat to their standing in the household, largely ignored her. Mr. Thornton barely acknowledged her presence, and Mrs. Thornton's interactions consisted mainly of criticism and instruction. Only Quinn seemed to actually see her. He was often away working with the cattle, but when their paths crossed, he would nod or tip his hat, sometimes offering a word of encouragement. "You're doing fine," he told her one evening when he found her struggling with a particularly heavy bucket of water. He took it from her hands, their fingers brushing momentarily. "It gets easier, does it?" she asked, unable to keep the weariness from her voice. "Some parts do," he replied with a small smile that transformed his weathered face. A month into her stay, Grace was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard raised voices from the barn. Curiosity drew her closer. "She's not pulling her weight, MacAllister," Mr. Thornton was saying. "City girl like that, what use is she?" "She's trying," Quinn's voice replied, a defensive edge to it. "She ain't never had to work like this before. We're not running a charity. Her father's debts aren't our concern. If Cousin Margaret hadn't insisted." Grace stepped back, her cheeks burning with shame and anger. So that was it. She was here out of reluctant obligation, not even family loyalty. And they thought her useless. That evening, when Quinn found her sitting alone on the porch steps after everyone else had retired, her eyes red-rimmed, he didn't ask questions. He simply sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I heard what Mr. Thornton said," she admitted after a long silence. "About me being useless," Quinn sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "He doesn't know you," he said simply. "None of them do." "And you do?" The question came out sharper than she intended. He turned those direct blue eyes on her again. "I know you get up every morning and try your hardest at things you never had to do before. I know you don't complain even when your hands are blistered. I know you read to little Tommy Wilson when his ma brings him by, and you helped old Mrs. Peterson with her marketing in town last week." He paused. "I see you, Grace Harrington." The simple statement nearly undid her. For the first time since arriving, Grace felt truly seen, not as a burden or an obligation, but as a person. "Thank you," she whispered. Quinn nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small book. "Thought you might like this, found it in town." He handed her a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. Grace took it with trembling hands. "How did you know I like to read? Seen you looking at the books in the parlor, but Mrs. Thornton doesn't seem keen on sharing them." The gesture, so thoughtful and unexpected, brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I can't remember the last time someone gave me a gift just to be kind." Quinn looked uncomfortable with her emotion but didn't retreat. "It ain't much." "It's everything," she contradicted him, clutching the book to her chest. From that evening forward, something shifted between them. Quinn began finding reasons to be near the house when Grace was working outside. He would carry water for her, fix things that needed mending before she could get to them, and occasionally leave small gifts: a wildflower, a pretty stone, once a ribbon he'd purchased in town that matched her eyes. For her part, Grace found herself looking for him throughout the day, her heart lifting when she caught sight of his tall form. She began setting aside a portion of the best biscuits for him and darning his socks with particular care when Mrs. Thornton assigned her the ranch hands mending. Summer arrived, bringing scorching heat and the cattle drive. Quinn would be gone for weeks, taking the herd to the railhead in Cheyenne. The night before he was to leave, Grace slipped out to the barn where the men were making final preparations. "Quinn," she called softly. He emerged from one of the stalls, surprise evident on his face. "Grace, something wrong?" "No, I." She held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I made you something for the trail." He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a hand-knitted scarf. "It gets cold at night," she explained, suddenly feeling foolish. "Even in summer." Quinn ran his fingers over the soft wool. "No one's ever made me anything before," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Well, now someone has." Grace found her courage and stepped closer. "Please be careful." "I will." His eyes held hers, and for a moment she thought he might say more, might even reach for her. But then one of the other cowboys called his name, and the moment was broken. The weeks of the cattle drive were the longest of Grace's life. Without Quinn's presence, the ranch felt even more oppressive. Mrs. Thornton seemed to find more fault with her work than ever, and the girls openly mocked her when she asked if there had been any word from the drive. "Why would anyone send word to you?" Louisa sneered. "You're just the help." But Grace had changed during her months at the ranch. The girl who had arrived from Boston, grieving and intimidated, had developed a quiet strength. "I was asking about all the men," she replied evenly, "since their safe return affects us all." When the cowboys finally returned, dusty and exhausted but successful, Grace was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She heard the commotion outside but couldn't leave her tasks. One by one, the men filed in for the welcome home meal Mrs. Thornton had instructed her to prepare. Quinn was one of the last to enter, his face sunburned and his clothes trail worn, but his eyes sought her immediately. Around his neck, despite the heat, was her scarf. That night, after everyone had retired, Grace heard a soft knock at the back door near her room. Quinn stood outside in the moonlight. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly when she opened the door, "but I needed to see you properly." "I'm glad you did," she admitted. "I missed you." "I thought about you every day," he confessed. "About your smile and how you see good in things even when they're hard." Grace felt her heart pounding. "I thought about you too." Quinn took a step closer, then hesitated. "Grace, I ain't got much to offer a woman like you. I'm just a cowboy with some savings and dreams of my own spread someday. And I'm just a penniless Boston girl who can't even make biscuits without burning them half the time," she replied with a small smile. "You're so much more than that." His voice was fervent. "You're kind and strong and beautiful." "So are you," she whispered. "Kind and strong, I mean." Her cheeks flushed. "Not beautiful, handsome." His laugh was soft and warm in the night air. "I've wanted to kiss you since the day you arrived," he admitted. "What's stopping you now?" The question hung between them for a heartbeat before Quinn closed the distance, his hand gently cupping her cheek as his lips found hers. The kiss was tender, almost reverent, and when they parted, Grace felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. "I should go," he said reluctantly, "but I'll see you tomorrow." Grace watched him walk away, her fingers touching her lips in wonder. The next morning, Grace was collecting eggs in the henhouse when she overheard Mrs. Thornton speaking to her husband in the yard. "The girl's been here nearly 4 months now," she was saying. "I think we've more than discharged our family obligation." My cousin in Denver has agreed to take her on as a companion for her invalid daughter. Good, Mr. Thornton replied. She eats more than she's worth. Make the arrangements. Grace froze, the basket of eggs nearly slipping from her grasp. They were sending her away again, passing her along like an unwanted parcel, and Quinn, she would have to leave Quinn. When she told him that evening, meeting secretly by the old oak tree at the edge of the property, his face darkened with anger. They can't just ship you around like freight, he said, pacing in agitation. You're a person, not property. I have no money, no family of my own, Grace reminded him bitterly. What choice do I have? Quinn stopped pacing and turned to her, his expression resolute. Marry me. What? Grace wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. Marry me, he repeated, taking her hands in his. I've been saving for years. I've got enough for a small place of our own. It won't be fancy, but it would be ours, and no one could send you away again. Quinn, we've known each other such a short time. And in that time, I've come to love you more than I thought possible, he said simply. I know your heart, Grace Harrington. I know how you love poetry and how you sing to yourself when you think no one's listening. I know how brave you are and how deeply you feel things. He squeezed her hands, and I think you might love me too. Tears filled Grace's eyes. I do, she whispered. I do love you. The next morning, Grace approached Mrs. Thornton as she was reviewing the household accounts. I need to speak with you, madam, she said, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Mrs. Thornton looked up with impatience. What is it? I'm busy. I wanted to thank you for taking me in these past months, Grace began, but I won't be going to Denver. The older woman's eyebrows rose sharply. I beg your pardon, Quinn MacAllister has asked me to marry him and I've accepted. The words gave her courage. We'll be leaving to start our own place as soon as the arrangements can be made. Mrs. Thornton's face flushed with anger. This is absurd. You barely know the man, and he's just a cowboy with nothing to his name. He has plenty to his name, Grace contradicted her. Honor, kindness, hard work. And he sees me, really sees me, which is more than I can say for anyone else in this house. You ungrateful girl, I've worked hard for my keep, Grace interrupted, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. I've done everything asked of me without complaint. But I'm not a package to be passed around at your convenience. I'm a woman with my own heart and choices. Mrs. Thornton rose from her chair, her eyes cold. Then you can leave today, and don't expect a reference, Grace nodded, feeling strangely light despite the anger directed at her. I'll pack my things. Quinn was waiting by the barn, having already spoken to Mr. Thornton and tendered his resignation. His face broke into a smile when he saw her approaching with her valises. That was quick, he commented, Mrs. Thornton suggested I leave immediately, Grace replied with a wry smile. She wasn't pleased with my decision. Quinn took her bags, his expression concerned. Are you sure about this, Grace? It won't be an easy life. She reached up to touch his cheek, no longer caring who might see. I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Quinn MacAllister. They were married the following week in the small church in Willow Creek. The ceremony was simple, attended by a few of Quinn's fellow cowboys, and surprisingly, the elderly woman Grace had met on the stagecoach, who turned out to be the local midwife. I knew there was something special about you, dear, she told Grace after the ceremony. You have a light in you that this hard country needs. Their new home was indeed small, a two-room cabin on a plot of land Quinn had been quietly purchasing over the years. It needed work, but as they stood together on the porch the evening after their wedding, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson, Grace couldn't imagine anything more perfect. It's not Boston, Quinn said, his arm around her waist. No, she agreed, leaning into him. It's better. It's ours. Their first year was challenging. The work was hard and money was tight. They lost half their small herd of cattle to a harsh winter, and Grace discovered that running a household without help was even more demanding than she'd expected. But through it all, they faced each challenge together, finding strength in their growing love. By their second year, things began to improve. Quinn's skill with horses brought additional income as neighbors brought their animals to be trained. Grace started a small vegetable garden that thrived under her care, and she discovered a talent for making preserves that she sold in town. In their third year, The sound of a baby's cry joined the household a daughter they named Emma, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. As Grace rocked her child by the fire, Quinn sitting beside them mending a bridle, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn asked, catching her thoughtful expression. "About how they sent me to live with strangers," she replied, "but you were the only one who really looked me in the eyes, who saw me for myself." "Best thing I ever did," he said with a smile, leaning over to kiss her softly, "because I saw something wonderful." As Emma grew, so did their ranch. By her 5th birthday, they had a proper house with 4 rooms, a stable of fine horses, and a reputation for honest dealing that brought customers from as far as Cheyenne. Grace's preserves won ribbons at the county fair, and Quinn's advice on horses was sought by ranchers throughout the territory. When Emma was 7, she was joined by a brother, James, and 2 years later by another sister, Sarah. Their home, once so small and simple, rang with children's laughter and the warm bustle of family life. On their 10th anniversary, Quinn took Grace for a ride to a hilltop overlooking their property. The land that had once seemed so stark to her eastern eyes now appeared beautiful rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, their house and barns nestled in a protective valley, cattle and horses grazing peacefully. "Did you ever think we'd have all this?" he asked, his arm around her shoulders as they sat side by side on a blanket. Grace leaned her head against him, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. "Never," she admitted. "When I first arrived in Willow Creek, I thought my life was over. Everything I knew was gone, and I was at the mercy of people who saw me as nothing but a burden. And now I know it was just beginning." She turned to face him, this man who had first captured her heart by simply seeing her when no one else would. "You gave me a home, Quinn. Not just a place to live, but somewhere I truly belong." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch still sending a thrill through her after all these years. "You gave me the same," he said. "A family, a purpose, a reason to build something lasting." As the sun began to set, painting the prairie in the same gold and crimson they had admired on their first night in their little cabin, Quinn pulled a small package from his pocket. "Happy anniversary," he said, handing it to her. Grace unwrapped it to find a locket on a delicate chain. Inside were miniature portraits of their 3 children, their young faces beaming. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Turn it over," Quinn instructed. On the back was engraved a simple message. "I see you, I love you, always." Grace closed her hand around the precious gift, overwhelming gratitude filling her heart. "Who would have thought," she said softly, "that being sent away from everything I knew would lead me to everything I needed?" Quinn pulled her close, his kiss as tender as the first they had shared outside her small room at the Thornton ranch. "Sometimes," he murmured against her lips, "the hardest journeys lead to the best destinations." As they rode back to their home, where their children waited with a surprise anniversary celebration they thought was secret, but that both parents had known about for weeks, Grace reflected on the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. From a grief-stricken girl being sent to live with cold strangers, to a woman surrounded by love and purpose, all because one cowboy had taken the time to truly see her. And as the years continued to pass, as their children grew and their ranch prospered, as gray threaded through their hair and lines of laughter appeared around their eyes, Quinn never stopped looking at her that way directly, honestly, seeing her for exactly who she was. And Grace never stopped being grateful for that first moment when, amidst the uncertainty and fear of a new beginning, she had found the one person who would truly see her through.